Welcome, welcome. Welcome, and sorry for that slight delay. Good morning, and welcome to the virtual seminar series organized by the NUS Center for Nature-Based Climate Solutions. I'm Dr. Kelly Siman, your host for today's panel. I'm a postdoctoral research fellow with the Center for Nature-Based Climate Solutions, and it's my pleasure to be the moderator for today's webinar on green recovery and just transition. Before we begin, I would like to announce two housekeeping details. First, we would like to congratulate Dr. Siman Skillerbeak, one of our speakers who welcomed twins into the world. So congratulations on your unending joy and exhaustion that you've just found. In addition, during this seminar, please keep your microphones muted to avoid audio interference. Please note that this session is recorded and will be posted on YouTube later, both on our CNCS channel as well as Bard University's Solve Climate by 2030. So Stanley, can you please advance the slide? And next one, please. Thank you. So the NUS Center for Nature-Based Climate Solutions is a newly established exactly 1 year ago this month. It aims to empower public and private sector leaders in Singapore and Asia to respond appropriately and decisively to climate change. Ultimately, this is for achieving a carbon neutral economy and stable global climate. The center has two key mandates. First, to build the evidence base on climate science for informing policy, strategy, and action. Second mandate is to build capacity in academic, government, and corporate sector leaders. I'm pleased to present this exciting and unique panel for you today. Panel is not only part of our regular seminar series, but the theme and the timing is being done in collaboration with Bard College's Solve Climate by 2030. NUS CNCS is one of over 120 universities in over 50 countries and a countless number of classrooms that are hashtag making climate a class. This week, on the universal theme of green recovery and a just transition. So by now, we're all very familiar with COVID over the past year, unprecedented economic disruption with the global economy starting to slowly back up. There's a focus on green recovery and a just transition. A just transition links 14 out of 17 sustainable development goals. We will now have a brief introduction in video by the founder of Solve Climate by 2030, Dr. Goodstein. Stanley?
Welcome to the Solve Climate Global Dialogues. You're participating in one of 125 events held across the planet, including in almost all 50 US states, part of a global project called Solve Climate by 2030. My name is Goodstein, and I'm an economist and director of the Graduate Programs in Sustainability at Bard College in New York, the lead organizer for Solve Climate. This last year has been difficult for everyone. As the world looks forward to recovery from COVID, we are focusing tonight on the most important question facing humanity. What can we do in this year in our regions to help solve climate change while supporting struggling communities that have faced widespread loss of life, economic disaster, and joblessness? Worldwide, from Australia to Kyrgyzstan, from Colombia to Malaysia, and from South Carolina to South Africa, Solve Climate audiences are hearing from local experts and young leaders about concrete steps that can really help nations solve climate change while creating much needed jobs and incomes for everybody. The year 2020 was one of the two hottest years in human history, bringing with it massive forest and grassland fires, record-breaking storms and hurricanes, and relentless rising seas. Solving climate is the challenge which the human species must now face. There's hope for the future. Solutions have continued to advance. This year, China committed to building a carbon neutral economy while the US rejoined the Paris Agreement. Solar, wind, and battery prices continue to fall while major car companies have been rushing to electrify the global fleet. Worldwide, movements for Black Lives Matter and Me Too are leading in bringing much delayed and urgently needed justice to the world. Time is short. We have until 2030, 10 years to solve climate. We can get a lot done in this decade. We have the solutions, but only if we focus the world on climate solutions and justice, and then do the work we have to do in our own cities and regions. For students listening, you are the leaders. Without you, the future we envision will not come. I'm asking tonight for your help. We're going to discover powerful ideas for climate solutions and climate justice and how you can be a part of the solution. But this message must reach beyond those of us who are listening right now. Would you ask all your teachers this week in every subject to make climate a class? The teacher can assign tonight's webinars homework for the students, and then afterwards have a one-class period discussion. And we mean every subject, from art to engineering, psychology.
Thank you, Stanley. That's okay. So it looks like the video cut out briefly, but the sentiment is there that all over the world, there are classes from high school, middle school, elementary, all the way up to university level, as well as these webinars that are all focusing on the same issue at the same time. So to make climate a class and a just recovery, just transition, and a green recovery. So today we have an excellent panel of 3 interdisciplinary speakers from energy policy to green finance and the private sector, and it's sure to spark some lively dialogue. They are Ms. Melissa Lowe. Melissa is a research fellow at the NUS Energy Studies Institute. Current research focuses on transparency of climate change action and reporting in Southeast Asia. Mr. Tony Chan is the associate planner lead for Southeast Asia for ARUP, which is instrumental in engineering and sustainability projects all over the world. And finally, Dr. Siman Skillerbeeckx, an assistant professor at the Lee Chian School of Business at Singapore Management University, as well as a serial social entrepreneur. A very warm welcome to the panel, and we are excited to have all of you here. Afterwards, we'll have a 10-minute discussion and Q&A. If you have any questions for our panelists during this event, please submit them to the poll EV at the link in the chat. You can upvote questions from others there as well, and the link, again, posted in the chat. Our first speaker is Melissa Lowe. Melissa is a research fellow at the NUS Energy Studies Institute. She holds a Master's of Law with distinction in Climate Change and Law, a Master's of Environmental Management, and an honors in Bachelor's of Geography. She has participated in UFCCC COPs for over a decade and is an active sustainability thought leader communicating with science in a variety of formats, from presentations to scientific journals to a number of forums. Her current research focuses on transparency of climate change action and reporting for Southeast Asia. So Melissa, please take it away.
Thanks, Kelly. Good afternoon, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all who are joining us. Thank you so much to Kelly for the introduction and the NUS Center for Nature-Based Climate Solutions for inviting me to be on this panel. I'm looking forward to the other panelists, Tony and Simon's remarks later, and a lively discussion on this topic. This morning, I'd like to focus my short remarks on what a green recovery means for Singapore. As all of you know, COVID-19 has been a shock to the global economy. The country is already demonstrating their commitment to addressing the ongoing climate crisis while working to contain the virus and to manage its impacts. Countries around the world are looking to build back better and to ensure a green recovery. But it remains to be seen what this will look like in practice. In broad terms, a green recovery might mean an aggressive shift away from fossil fuels. But for Singapore, it can be much more than that. It means building up capabilities for a competitive and sustainable low carbon future. The goal as we navigate through this pandemic should be to ensure an inclusive and just climate resilient transition. The Singapore government moved quickly to ensure that these plans are on paper and on track. In March 2020, just as the pandemic was growing, Singapore submitted its enhanced nationally determined contribution to peak emissions at 65 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalent around 2030, and its long-term low emissions development strategy to halve emissions from its 2030 peak, from 65 million tons of CO2 equivalent to 33 million tons of CO2 equivalent by 2050, with a view to achieving net zero emissions as soon as viable in the second half of the century. Major fiscal packages were created. This drew down nearly 100 billion Singapore dollars from past reserves in the financial year to help Singaporeans tide over and to position the country for future growth and to support a competitive transition to a greener future. As many of you know, the Ministry of Sustainability and the Environment, formerly known as the Ministry of Environment and Water Resources, has said it plans to create some 4,000 new and upgraded green jobs in 2021 and 55,000 over the next decade as Singapore pursues sustainable development. Jobs are likely to open up in the environmental services, the food and agri-technology industries, as Singapore hopes to enhance food security amid the pandemic as well. In February of this year, the Singapore Parliament unanimously passed the motion that acknowledged the seriousness of the global threat of climate change and called for action. This led to the announcement of the Singapore Green Plan 2030. The 10-year plan sets goals for Singapore that is set to strengthen ongoing efforts by the Singapore government to implement commitments under the UN's 2030 Sustainable Development Agenda and the Paris Agreement. These questions remain, however. Does Singapore have the deep expertise in climate science and environmental technologies to operationalize the Green Plan and to reduce emissions at the scale and speed that is necessary? Is expertise enough to ensure a smooth green recovery? Realistically, reducing emissions in an absolute fashion is challenging for Singapore. I think many of you are aware of this and the trade-offs. But as companies here pivot away from fossil fuels and towards lower carbon alternative, job cuts and the need to retrain workers to go into other industries are now a reality. Will need to be addressed and quickly. Identifying retrenched workers from fossil-related industries and ascertaining their desire to be reskilled into other jobs is a challenging task. Much depends on the role of these workers and whether their skill sets are transferable, for instance, to the clean energy sector. A green recovery can only happen if we aggressively develop capabilities and expertise for both immediate and long-term needs so that we can be at the forefront of green innovation. One thing that can happen right now is to prepare our educational institutions, families, individuals for the change that is happening and coming. Everyone needs to be on board with the message that green collar jobs and clean economic recovery is essential to building back better and achieving our climate goals. COVID-19 has also revealed that society places emphasis on measures of success that go beyond GDP growth, including happiness, health, equality for citizens and non-citizens alike. So instead of only saying that we need to create jobs and lay the foundation for future growth and improve long-term competitiveness, Singapore and all of us, we should also qualify that these jobs should be inclusive, that they take into consideration Singapore's position on climate change. We must not shy away from difficult conversations. Singapore is small, we're open, we're trade dependent, and so we should expect trade-offs, such as those that require us to choose between economic growth, sustaining middle income jobs, and emissions reductions. These are some hard truths that we have to face. But the key is to have those important conversations and to find those innovative solutions together. We must do this if we want our recovery to be truly inclusive. And so to conclude, while it is the government's priority to create jobs, strengthen social safety nets during this unprecedented crisis, everyone has a part to play in creating the right environment to develop the pipeline of inclusive and climate resilient jobs and competitive advantages so that Singapore will continue to survive, not just survive, but also to thrive, using less resources for a low carbon future to become reality. And green recovery doesn't mean anything if we come out of this pandemic with the same mindset and actions as before. As a society, we should begin to think critically and act more consciously so as to recover better. And with that, I conclude my remarks and look forward to the discussion ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa. Really insightful. And I think that's a really excellent segue for our next speaker as well. I'm excited to have Mr. Tony Chan with us to provide a unique private sector point of view. Tony has degrees in town planning and sustainable development, in addition to postgrad degrees in business, economic, and project management. His expertise lies in delivering multidisciplinary projects in an integrated and very systemic manner. This includes developing master planning and urban design with associate water strategies such as energy, water, transportation, all to address natural resource consumption. So very interested to hear how Tony and ARUP are moving forward during this time. Tony?
Thanks a lot, Kelly. And I think it's obviously it's a big issue for us to deal with, as you heard from Melissa, right? From a country, city-state perspective. It's challenging enough because Singapore itself, in terms of primary emission, I think 40% is from the energy supply, which is natural gas, almost fully natural gas, and then the other 40% from the oil, gas, and petrochemicals of the industry. So it's challenging in that primary emission aspect. And what we're able to do from the built environment aspect, especially buildings and the number of buildings we're involved with, it's from the secondary emissions side. I'll share my screen and share some of the projects we're doing, but the task at hand is immense for all of us. Is my screen being shared, Kelly? Yeah.
Yes, you're good, Tony.
Okay. So for us, well, I'm with ARUP, and just as a company background, we're slightly different in the sense that we're fully employee-owned globally, and although we have to be profitable, ultimately the principle behind everything we do is all purpose-driven. This year's strategy, global strategy for us, is that we have to push harder from the sustainability aspect, and climate resiliency and lowering of carbon is a prime objective for us to do in all our projects this year. As you know, last year tied with 2016 as the hottest year on record, and as you can see based on the chart, right, is rising drastically every year, and that's scary as well. If you know, this is commonly used as an image in when talking about glacier ice retreat, Mendenhall Glacier in Alaska in '58 at the same time of the year, and how much it has retreated in 2011. I was there in 2019 and we did a family cruise there. It's retreated even further. So right before, my own eyes, rather than just seeing through screens or looking at photos in the past, how much the glacier ice has retreated. Of all the countries that sign up to the Paris Agreement, only 2 countries' plans are on track to hit the 1.5 degree mark, Morocco and Gambia. And those are just plans to hit it, right? It's not, they may not even hit it itself. So everyone is clearly not on track to hit the 1.5 degrees mark. Same for where we're heading for Singapore as well. A lot of it is down to energy, and despite the energy demand dropping last year, we all know it's only temporary. It's gonna pick up again post-COVID, and then when even the UN are stating that countries are projected to produce twice the limit on oil, gas, and coal requirements to hit the Paris Agreement. And despite all what the oil companies are saying, when you look at the numbers, only 1% of their revenue is directed towards non-core products. So essentially, it's still business as usual for many of the oil, gas, and coal companies, despite all the different words they're putting out there at the moment. So when we're looking at, because fossil fuel is a main issue we have to deal with, you can see production is moving upwards rather than downwards, where it has to be consistent with the Paris Agreement. Where we're able to influence on the built environment side, and within ARUP and personally, we are not going far enough. We have to push a lot harder, and it's a collective effort where we're able to influence and where policymakers, etc., are able to influence. We see many efforts being done to adapt to this changing climate. A lot of things being done, especially you see around Singapore, lots of trees being planted on green buildings, on buildings to minimize heat island effects. This is a project just to the northwest of Singapore, where lots of planting on tree building tops, etc. And it's all fine and well, but where we're going is clearly not on track, right? What do cities look like in the future? Are we going to be building buildings that and districts that float to adapt to a changing climate? We've seen this in the past, Lake Titicaca in Mexico, where they're adapting to the environment they are in. In Krabi in Thailand, you see floating villages and they have football fields on water, etc. We are using the UN SDG and obviously the planetary framework as guiding documents and guiding principles around how we do things. We always map it against what we are achieving from the UN SDG perspective. we did the city resilience framework for the 100 Resilient Cities program. I'm actually working with the ADB at the moment and using this framework to see how cities are built up in a more resilient manner across Asia. We are working with C40 on tackling carbon with a number of cities around the world. We are co-developing strategic research with them on focus on carbon reduction. Digital, as you know, is an enabler. So we are trying to use digital and smart technologies more to enable those objectives to reduce carbon. This was one of the first projects, being a master planner, and why I was attracted to ARUP all those years before was this project, which actually, besides just drawing a master plan and making sure that it looks pretty on plan, I think this was one of the first projects where we tried to pull everything together. So we are modeling resource consumption. We want to make sure that there's a zero carbon within the city itself. We were mapping resource flows and seeing if when we move land users around, what does it mean in terms of resource consumption, what it means for energy consumption, etc. Some of the tools we use when we are trying to map those resource flows as we plan the city. And this was the final result. It's only been partly implemented for a variety of reasons in Shanghai, political change, objectives being different, and we're also trying to address the wetland to the east of the project. And so as of today, it's only a partial part of it has been implemented. And this was a diagram at the end. So as a learning from that project, there were a lot of challenges because the policies were just not in place to make sure that we forced through the targets we wanted. So when we were trying to talk about renewables and all that, from an energy supply perspective in China, there's nothing that local government or even provincial government are able to do to force that change because the state grid, etc., are just not going to move on what they've been planning all the while. So what we tried to do was also to make sure that we pushed through energy targets and water targets directly into the zoning plans. In China, the guidelines doesn't mean anything because the developers that come on board, all they're going to follow is the zoning plan and the land lease condition. So guidelines to them doesn't mean anything. They can just throw it out the door. So where we were trying to affect change was pushing energy targets directly into the zoning plan. Not as easy in China, because if you change it in China, you're essentially changing it for the whole country. It doesn't have a system like Australia or UK, where you have local councils approving plans. This has to be changed at the national level. So for this project in Beijing, we actually mapped all the KPIs, especially on energy and water, and then we force it through into the zoning plan itself. So we had to model to make sure that there's enough renewable energy to hit those targets we wanted. In this case, it was coming from solar as well as ground source heated water coming out from the ground. So we're putting targets into the zoning plan itself. Multiple awards, it got pushed through, and now such zoning plans can be produced all over China, and the project itself won multiple national as well as global planning awards. We also tried to incorporate C40's climate positive development program, and the first one that was done in China was redevelopment of an industrial site for the National Capital Steel project. So they were decommissioning the plant, and then now it's a mixed-use zone. So that was done together with C40. If you've been to Shanghai for the World Expo, post the World Expo, in this part of the project, we were also trying to push through new targets, sustainable targets they're able to hit. I think things like renewable energy ratio, the amount of water being reused, and then putting it into the park itself. Also got the LEED Platinum, but I think we can be given the scenario now, we can be a bit more aggressive in terms of the low carbon targets as well. So this has been completed recently. Where we are trying to affect change now, we are also doing the new capital city in Indonesia. Of course, even internally, there are questions on, are you going to be building a rainforest areas, etc. We had a lot of pressure internally, whether we were helping them hit the right targets. There was a target for 100% renewables. The land to be developed is at the moment almost all agricultural land or plantation forests. So we want to make sure that targets such as planting, etc., is coming back higher than what we replaced previously. So that this project has a 100% renewable target, mainly from solar, a huge solar plant outside. But there's also challenges within the site, because if you know, East Kalimantan is mainly coal industry. So we are up against a lot of challenges in terms of the capital city setting the standard on not using coal as an energy supply source. Various other zero carbon buildings we've done. We've done a zero carbon building in Hong Kong for the Building Construction Authority, more as a showcase on what can possibly be done when we push the boundary. At that time, I think it wasn't cost efficient because solar was expensive, but now solar has dropped drastically and making it a lot viable as well. The Beddington Zero Energy Development in the UK, there's been BETZ, that's been quite a number of these sort of projects in the UK as well, because of the top-down target to reduce carbon. We've tried things like algae on the facade, so that as you push through algae through the facade and then it gets activated, bioactivated, you reuse the sludge from the algae, and then that gets fed into a biogas plant in the basement. And this was built in Hamburg in Germany. As we try different things, we're also working with the Economic Development Board here in Singapore. We have a Future Cities Hub program to see areas of innovation we are able to work on together, and also increase the knowledge within the industry and ARUP itself. So for this coming year, the focus is on energy, low carbon, and climate change. With that, I think despite some interesting projects we've done, a lot of things, we always pull different disciplines together to make sure that the approach is integrated manner. We have energy guys sitting together with our water guys, with our urban planners and architects, brainstorming and seeing how far we can push the boundary. I think it has to be looked at multiple levels, from energy supply to how we strategize from a macro perspective at city level down to infrastructure and buildings, as well as personally our own consumption patterns on reducing demand as well. I still think definitely based on the targets you've seen and the examples cities are heading towards the Paris Agreement, we're not getting there anywhere near where we have to push in terms of energy and carbon targets. I think when we started talking about carbon and sustainability in the late 90s, early 2000s, we are looking at about 350, 360 parts per million. Now we're at 420. And even if we stop all development and making it sure it's zero now, the carbon emission, the carbon in the air is still going to continue on to about 500 odd, I think. So we have to get there a lot faster. Challenges abound, but also I know from a commercial perspective, we still have to be sort of profitable, but regardless, I think both at the policy level and what we're able to do commercially, I think we just have to be a lot more aggressive, faster. With that, that's the end of my slides. Thanks a lot, Kelly. And I'll pass you on to Siman.
Thank you, Tony. The holistic and very systemic approach that ARUP is taking to all of your infrastructure projects is really interesting, and I really like that about your company. We're going to switch tacks to Dr. Siman Skillerbeeckx, who's going to look at it from a really interesting technological side. An academic entrepreneur who is an assistant professor of strategic management at the Lee Kong Chian School of Business at Singapore Management University. His research focuses on digitization, innovation, and sustainability. In addition, he founded the Global Mangrove Trust, which uses blockchain technology and remote sensing to support mangrove reforestation. This is also in addition to his social entrepreneurship of integrating positive impact into every business transaction by his other startup, Handprint. Can't wait to hear your views on the just transition. Siman, please.
Thank you very much. You should all be able to see some of my slides right now. Let me just get rid of these annotation things. So what I'll talk about for the next couple of minutes is this idea that I've been developing at university and then also more and more in practice with my two startups, so Handprint and Global Mangrove Trust, which is digital sustainability. So I firmly believe that digital technologies are driving a sustainability revolution, increasingly so. And as Tony said in his talk, we all know that digital is an enabler of sustainability. And so the question I'm going to try to answer in this talk is why. So this is some information about me, which has been said. And so for me, what I've been researching the last, let's say, 4 or 5 years is this idea that digitization and sustainability as two very powerful trends have been converging. And in a variety of academic work that I've published and hope to publish soon, I've been trying to explore what is really behind this convergence. And so what we've done is we've defined, and so we as a couple of colleagues and I, so we've defined digital sustainability as all the types of organizational activities that advance the Sustainable Development Goals through the deployment of technologies that create, use, transmit, or source electronic data. And so these activities obviously are being taken up by more and more organizations, including startups, but including, of course, big organizations like ARUP, and also by governments. But I'm going to specifically focus on for-profit businesses, and so not government or NGOs. And so what we have seen is that 3 things are happening at the same time, and they're actually exacerbated or reinforced often by the pandemic. So one is the expansion of corporate purpose towards the inclusion of much more social and environmental goals. Secondly is the enablement of what we call economies of collective action, which means that digitization has made it much cheaper to act as a group, to come together and to coordinate transactions, to coordinate economic activity and other types of activity in a non-hierarchical way, which is proving to be very useful. And third is the digitization is enabling the appropriation of public value. I'll explain that more in the next couple of slides. So what do we see when you think about purpose? So purpose is a very big word. It's kind of a buzzword of the last couple of years. Organizations now all have to be purpose-driven. But what we see in reality is that purpose-driven organizations truly outperform their competitors. And the results are very stark. They have much faster growth, up to 3 times faster. They have much more loyal customers, and they have higher employee retention. They even become more innovative. And so, and what is interesting about this is that at the same time that we see all of these benefits of purpose, we also see that the meaning of purpose is really broadening significantly. Specifically, what we see is that companies this day and age, especially if they want to attract top talent, need to have a purpose that goes beyond profit maximization and explicitly includes social and environmental goals. An example of this would be Nike taking a very public stance on the Black Lives Matter movement and actually increasing its profitability despite the pandemic. And so at the same time, of course, companies have been digitizing for a long time. And if it's true that that purpose has become much more centered around sustainability activities, it is very logical that companies will also use these digital technologies in order to tackle some of these sustainability challenges. At the same time, with the pandemic, what we've seen is a shift in public awareness. So public awareness around sustainability. So of course, the pandemic has been dreadful for so many things and for human health and so, but what we've seen as well is that people, and especially younger generations, have become much more aware of their physical interconnectedness. And so when you say like, global trade made us all economically interconnected, and the internet made us somewhat socially interconnected. What the pandemic has done is it made us physically interconnected, and we were finally realize this, and what that means, that they influence climate change, all of those kind of things, and that they can maybe do something about this. And the digital technologies have, of course, been important in kind of fostering that awareness, but have also at the same time made it possible to, made it cheaper to act together, to do things together in ways that previously were not possible. So if we look at like how they've digitization has kind of transformed the way we can store knowledge in the cloud, like open source activities, but also the way we create knowledge now with like centralized computing, machine learning, and even something like Wikipedia, which is much older, which is also a decentralized digitally enabled way of creating knowledge, which we all know now is potentially the most accurate source of truth in the world, would be Wikipedia. And with the advent of blockchain, digitization has also changed the way we kind of exchange knowledge or exchange things of value, which is going to prove to be very, very influential, I think, in the next years, especially once we solve the high energy costs that are associated with some blockchain technologies. And then finally, and potentially most importantly, like when we're thinking about the capitalist system, you can have an expansion of purpose where companies are going to be more aware, like, oh, we need to do something for sustainability. Great. We can have a lowering of barriers of taking action, because digitization makes it easier for smaller and bigger organizations and individuals to become part of this sustainability movement. But it doesn't really work if you can't also generate profit, because in a capitalist system, this is the key driver. And so what's interesting is that digitization is beginning to solve the tragedy of the commons. And so the tragedy of the commons, for those who are not familiar with it, is the idea or the reality that if you put goods in public ownership, so you don't privatize ownership, that there is a significant like problem of incentive, like who is going to take care of them. And so the famous example from the economist Coase, who came up with this idea, and Hardin, who talked about this in the 60s and in the 30s, is this idea of like, oh, if you have a grass field and you have 100 different farmers around this, or sheep farmers, and every sheep farmer has one sheep, and they can just, and every sheep grazes on the grass, everything is fine. But the moment someone says like, well, actually there's enough grass, there's only 100 sheep, I can buy a second sheep, everything is still fine. As long as the grass field is well kept, it's not a problem. But once every farmer starts adding more and more sheep, suddenly we don't have grass anymore, and then everyone suffers. And this tends to happen because there is no ownership of the commons, like of the grass field. And so everyone has a private incentive to increase their use of the commons without really having a collective incentive to take care of it. And so what's interesting with digitization is that we see organizations finding solutions for this by a combination of lots of complex technologies, right? So like, for instance, remote sensing, machine learning, and then tokenization of a specific public goods in order to create private ownership. And so a very concrete example is actually something that my organization, the Global Mangrove Trust, is working on together with a variety of other partners, is this idea that we can tokenize the benefits that are associated with investing in forests, right? So if we invest in forests, typically you're investing in a public good, but people that, the countries in which those forests need to be regrown, let's say Indonesia or Myanmar, where you have like mangrove forests that need to be regrown or better preserved, they don't have the financial resources, but companies have an incentive to invest in that as long as they can legitimately claim that the carbon that's being absorbed is theirs, right? So they can make a claim about carbon absorption that people believe, whereas while at the same time creating a public good. And so that's what we see happening. And really this is becoming, this is enabled by digitization. And while these kind of solutions existed before, now with digitization, it becomes much more scalable to do these kind of things, like tokenizing private benefits. So the claim that you can make, which is good for your reputation as a company, that I've absorbed carbon, or even I've taken plastic from the ocean, or I'm responsible for this coral reef reconstruction, or I'm responsible for supporting 1 hour of education. We need to have these things, we need to digitize these positive activities in order so that companies can lay claim on them, can benefit from them, and then it aligns with the capitalist system. And I think digitization is really doing a lot of wonderful things in this space. So in summary, so we see this digitization influencing the mainstreaming of sustainability integration into the profit agenda of corporations, reducing the barriers to participation, making it much easier for especially smaller companies to become part of the solution. Many small SMEs maybe want to do something around sustainability, but find it extremely difficult, don't have the resources, don't have the knowledge, and so are by default kind of excluded from being part of the solution. Digitalization is helping those organizations as well as individuals to become part of the solution. And then all of this is kind of underpinned by this increasing ability to privatize value that is created in public goods. And by this privatization, you create incentives for organizations to invest in public goods that they don't really own, as long as they can lay claim to some of the benefits that these public goods create. This, I think, is a very important trend. So what are some of the examples? So what I mentioned before, with my organization, Global Mangrove Trust, we have set up a partnership here in Singapore with Zilliqa, an NUS spin-off on the blockchain, with Kumi Analytics, a company that does machine learning based on spatial information data, and Marek Spectrum, one of the biggest commodity brokers in the world. And the goal of this partnership is to bring blue carbon to the market in a very new way. So the partnership is setting up special purpose vehicles. We're now in conversations here with the Monetary Authority to set up these special purpose vehicles to invest in mangrove reforestation, and then to tokenize the carbon that is being absorbed by these mangroves. Mangroves are incredible trees because they absorb up to 10 times more carbon than terrestrial forests, and they typically also exist on the type of land that is not very useful for agriculture, and they have lots of other benefits in terms of protecting local communities from storms and from tsunamis and from cyclones, and improving the soil and the stability of the soil, so that islands like Bintan stop sinking if you grow more mangroves on them. So lots of benefits for the local community, but the company that is investing in this or that is sponsoring this only really cares about the fact that they want to lay claim to the private benefits. Like they want to say, I'm carbon neutral, or ideally, I'm climate positive. Like I'm absorbing 10 times more carbon than I'm responsible for through investing in this process. But at the same time, they're creating a public good that is incredibly powerful and has much bigger benefits than pure carbon. So with Handprint, so with my other organization, what we've set up is a digital platform that enables companies to integrate positive impact into a variety of their business processes. So the first tool we've built is a couple of e-commerce plugins, as displayed on the slide, where companies can just go to our website, download these plugins, and integrate them into the checkout process of their organization. And the plugin automatically reroutes part of the money that is normally spent on the card to a specific cause, a specific impact project that the company selects. So that could be a reforestation project, that could be a coral project, that could be an education project, a water project, a sanitation project, all kinds of projects that align with the Sustainable Development Goals. You can now integrate into your sales, and as a consequence, also tie your sustainability activities in a strategic way to your business growth. Because it's only when your growth genuinely becomes good for the world that you can align the incentives that we need as a capitalist system to solve this problem. As long as companies do sustainability as something that is secondary, which by and large is still what happens, especially in Europe, but in most of the world, we can't solve this problem. We need to make sure that the creation of positive impact is intrinsic to the company's KPIs and the company's goals. So this works for sales, but we can do this with lots of other types of digital KPIs as well. So we're talking with ride-hailing companies to integrate positive impact into ride-hailing. That seems very obvious. We can do it as well with food delivery, and we're talking with banks to create it in bank accounts or in credit cards. We're talking with hotels to create it in bookings, with travel agencies to create it in, to embed it in experiences. Any kind of KPI that is measured digitally can be integrated with a positive impact. And these things are truly enabled by digital technology.
Simon, I'm gonna, oh, perfect. Good timing, Simon. We are running a little bit short on time for the Q&A, and we've got a number that have already been uploaded to Poll EV. So just a reminder, so we're going to be moving into the Q&A. There's the Poll EV in the chat, and you can upload or upvote some of the questions. We have a lot of really good questions that have already been submitted. Tony, I'm going to pass this one over to you. Globally, how can we incentivize companies to reduce reliance on carbon energy when a majority of their operations are located in nations with less stringent climate regulations? So from your perspective in the private sector, your thoughts, please.
I think we have to look at the bigger picture, right? We have to get to the target drastically fast. Cooperation and politics are not exactly the best way forward. Politicians, especially in Asia, it's such short term, right? Every 5 years, they're changing governments, etc. So their policies are more short term. Cooperation, obviously, is targeting profits. And the guys you really have to target are the oil and gas industry. And then they have set up things like Center for Climate Initiative. I think the top 12, 13 oil guys in the world have set this up in the UK. But when you get a bunch of guys that are retiring in 5 years, they're not going to get anywhere fast. So for me on the personal side as well is that despite it's not a fight between the renewables and the oil and gas and coal guys, but giving them an option to transition into non-fossil fuel products. So we are brainstorming a few areas. We've seen guys proposing things like trans-ocean plastic pipelines. So you get the benefits of moving fresh water from areas of water abundance to areas of arid land. And the amount of plastic pipes required allows a market to be created for the oil gas guys to transition into something they're still making money on, but not heading towards fossil fuel production. So we see radical innovations like this. So I think the question is, yeah, we can do some things to push at the top-down policy level, but it's not easy. But not as easy as countries like China or Singapore, which has a strong, stable government and able to have that as a driver. So I think, unfortunately, the situation we see in most countries in the world is the challenge of short-term targets for politicians. Unfortunate, but that's the current situation.
Always a mismatch between the politics and how nature actually functions. Yep. Simon, we've got a specific question for you. If you can briefly answer, what are your thoughts about the crypto market and its environmental costs?
I think it's solvable. So the only problem with crypto and environmentalism is really proof of work, which is the consensus algorithm or the consensus system that is used by blockchain, by Bitcoin, and by still quite a few other blockchain technologies. I think over time, maybe even for Bitcoin, we're going to solve this by moving to another consensus algorithm. Once we do so, the environmental costs go down a lot. But it's going to take some time. And of course, in the meanwhile, I think Bitcoin itself kind of emits more, or is responsible for more electricity consumption than Argentina by now. So there is a big problem, but I don't think that means we should get rid of the technology altogether. There is lots of technologies take a long time to come into their own. It's not going to be different, I think, with blockchain. This is a transformative technology that is going to change everything about commerce and about even how we interact as people. It's going to be as influential as the internet. It just takes some time, and I have faith that it's going to that the environmental footprint is going to be reduced massively.
Good. Yeah, interesting answer. Okay, we have time for one more question, and this one's going to be to you, Melissa. If Singapore is able to provide low carbon energy, can this be a competitive advantage for us, given that the electricity prices are higher?
Thanks, Kelly. Yeah, so I saw this question quite early on and I was thinking about it. I know time is really short. I did want to say that I think these are really important questions to ask ourselves. Certainly, people have been calling for the carbon tax to be increased, for instance, in Singapore, in order to drive energy efficiency, among other things. And one of the key trade-offs, if you will, is that obviously power companies are going to pass through the cost to people, right? And it's possibly regressive because those who are needier could end up paying more for climate change, essentially, right? When we make sure that the cost is appropriate for the pollution that we are putting out. Because of time, I would say I think that Minister ChuanJin actually lays out some of these trade-offs very clearly in a podcast that he did on climate conversations with Channel News Asia. I would encourage everyone who is interested in trade-offs, interested in the Singapore Green Plan, particularly on the energy reset pillar of the Green Plan, to go and listen to the 30-minute podcast. He covers it quite broadly, I guess. So because time is quite short, I know you need to wrap up. Yeah.
I think this conversation can definitely go for another hour or so, given the really great questions that have also been submitted. Tony, there's a lot of interest in the questions about the algae facade. So perhaps we can follow up and get some questions and then follow up with everybody afterwards. But that is all the time that we have for today. Thank you to Solve Climate by 2030 initiative. Mr. Tony Chan, Ms. Melissa Lowe, Dr. Siman Skillerbeak, thank you so much for your time, as well as everybody who joined us today. Before we end, we'd like to all take a group photo if you're amenable. If you're comfortable, you can turn on your videos. And thanks, everyone. And before you leave, we would appreciate your kind help in filling out the feedback that is also in the chat. You can see the link, and then we'll be sending everyone this link as well, along with some other information about Solve Climate by 2030. So let's get everybody in view. Everybody's smiling faces in the morning. And Stanley or Ada, if you can take the photos, that would be great. And Ada or Stanley, I'll let you run this to count down for the group photo. I
think we should unpin ourselves, right, to get more people in the frame.
Yes. I see some people don't want to be in the photo. All good. All right, let's take a quick one. Ada, you got it? Okay, great. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much. And hope to see you at the next seminar.
Thank you.
You guys.
Thanks very much for having me. Bye.
Bye.